Hello and welcome to episode 4 of our quarantine hangout. And this week we have another very special guest. We've got lots of interesting things to talk about. It's Toby from Bier und Bretzel. I'm butchering the pronunciation, no doubt. I don't think I need to translate that for the English speakers in the audience somehow.
I'm greatly offended. Right now. Das ist unakzeptabel.
You should be. I think it's a surprise to a lot of English speakers that Bretzel is with a B instead of a P, which is how it's more commonly spelt in the English-speaking world, America in particular.
Also another great insult to the German language.
Yeah. Well, and not as much of an insult as those like little cracker things that they call pretzels. Like, what even are those?
Well, they are pretty nice, actually. They are super hard to get in Germany, which is.
Are they really?
Fun.
Yeah.
But they are awesome.
Huh. Yeah. Well, I like the real thing. Especially on a cold day when you buy it on a stand in the street and it's freezing cold and it's still warm.
Yeah, we also don't eat warm pretzels in Germany.
No,
really? We eat them cold. And not with, I think the Americans do eat them with mustard.
Mustard or like a hot cheese sauce, like a beer cheese sauce or nacho cheese.
Yeah, we only eat them with butter, like with thick butter, and sometimes with cream cheese.
Okay.
Here in Hessen, where I live, we eat them with cream cheese, which is new for me because I only knew it with butter from the south.
So the beer is just an accompaniment. Then this is the important thing. You don't need to dip your pretzel in your beer.
Well, you can do it, but I don't know. To each their own, I guess.
I'm not sure. Even I'm not sure. I'm convinced on that front. I think you're taking two great things, and the combination is not necessarily better than the sum of the parts.
Yeah, I agree.
So we have had a very exciting weekend, and so we've got some things to thank you for, Toby, and we're gonna talk about this towards the end of the podcast. But very briefly, let's just briefly discuss. Over the weekend, we had, I think, it might be the first ever online wargaming convention, the Paint All the Minis online convention, PatmaCon. I think is how it's pronounced, and we had an absolute blast. Did we not, Sean?
Oh, it was great. I'm tired. I'm as tired as if I was walking the halls physically. It was wild. I was impressed with how cool it was, and it really did feel like a convention.
Yeah. It had that genuine, exciting atmosphere where lots of people are running around and talking to each other and talking about the cool things that they've seen, and a bit of retail therapy going on while we're all bored and stuck indoors and nothing to do. Finding some new things to paint is probably not a bad idea in this particular climate. And of course, we're all a bit game starved. Because unless your main gaming partner happens to also be living in your house, then not many of us are getting a lot of war games played. However, thanks to Toby, we managed to overcome that difficulty in the convention as well, because Toby made for us a very impressive, and I have to say, I really was fantastically impressed and really excited about it in general. He made for us a tabletop simulator mod, and tabletop simulator is something that like many of us, I think I bought years ago and pretty much did nothing with until now, and I wouldn't even know how to start making a mod. But Toby, tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, it's a computer game. So you buy it on Steam. I think it's the only place you can buy it right now, and you can play tabletop games on it. It's basically a physics-based sandbox. You
Yeah,
just
so
have
it's
a
3D,
yeah, it's
which of
completely
course is
3D.
essential for Drowned Earth.
Yeah,
Wouldn't
and you
work
have
if it wasn't.
very basic physics effects. So you can have a kind of, I don't know. Some of you might know the Bretzel engine,
Mm-hmm.
which is another program where you can play tabletop games with, but it's completely 2D. So you
Yeah.
always have this top-down view, and it's nice to have, but it never really feels like playing a tabletop game
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
the physical aspect and the 3D aspect is missing. And with Tabletop Simulator, you actually have some of the elements. Like you can throw the dice like you want. You can, if you are not careful, now a piece of terrain and let it fall over. And you can flip the table if you want, and everyone who tries out Tabletop Simulator flips the table all the time. And what is the greatest thing about it is you can build your own modules. There are some games included in the program, and you can also buy some DLC games, which are official modules by different creators, mostly board games. And but you can also build your own. So, and it has some very basic but very, very powerful tools to do so. So you can implement miniatures either in 2D or in 3D. 2D is super easy. 3D is a little bit more complicated. And you can integrate images and other objects, and you can use components of other people's mods and build your own stuff with it. And basically, when you know how to do this, then you can build every game you can imagine. You can import all the cards you need. You can import the dice. You can build special dice with special symbols. You can everything you can imagine you can build. And it has been done for quite some time since Tabletop Simulator was created or released. And I actually also I bought it when it first came out, and I saw a few Warhammer 40k mods, and I played some matches of Warhammer 40k with it with my brother, who lives a little bit away. And I always thought it was nice and interesting, and there were more and more modules coming for popular games like Star Wars Legion and things. And but I never really found people to play with because most people, completely understandable, prefer the more haptic feeling of real tabletop games and playing with more miniatures and stuff you painted yourself. And this is, of course, missing in Tabletop Simulator. But right now it's becoming really popular, I have a feeling. And which is interesting. I made, like, over a year ago, I made a video tutorial for how to play Star Wars Legion in Tabletop Simulator, because there is a very, very sophisticated mod for Star Wars Legion online with automation and scripts and 3D miniatures, which were created from 3D models from computer games, which are actually posed like the original tabletop miniatures. Really crazy. And I found it fascinating, and I uploaded the video, and nobody watched it. Nobody was interested at all. And right now, I'm following especially the German tabletop wargaming YouTube scene, and like every second YouTube channel has their own version of, by the way, there's this tool, Tabletop Simulator. Watch me play Tabletop Simulator. And I thought, okay, I could do that, but I could also go a little bit deeper and try out building stuff with it. And which is actually much more interesting, because the I first tried it with the Privateer Press Kickstarter, which ended a few weeks ago. The Warcaster Kickstarter. They released some print and play material, and I am terrible with glue and scissors and building stuff myself on paper. So I decided to just try to build the print and play stuff in Tabletop Simulator.
Yeah.
And that worked really well. And then, one thing came to another, and then I built the Drowned Earth Tabletop Simulator mod.
Well, it's so I think you can show it to us in a second, but also I've realized I introduced you like everybody already knew exactly who you were, and it occurs to me that our German viewers definitely will, but perhaps some of the English speaking ones won't. What is Bier and Bretzel? I said it and then started talking about Bretzels. So
There were important stuff first. Mm. So
it's all
that's
right.
the beer. I
We
don't
can
have
wait.
pretzels.
Building anticipation.
Well, it's my German language tabletop wargaming YouTube channel, where I mainly do battle reports for also mainly smaller tabletop games. I started about, or let me think, I think about 2 years ago, I started with the channel because I had the feeling that especially smaller independent tabletop games are underrepresented especially in the German YouTube scene. Of course, we have a lot of 40K and some Star Wars Legion, and now some Song of Ice and Fire. So from the bigger companies, but the smaller games are very underrepresented. And I actually was watching a lot of Guerrilla Miniatures at the time,
Yeah.
who I saw that he already visited you in this
Yeah,
hangout.
yeah. No, he's made a number of videos, and I've chatted with him a number of times. Yeah, he's a great guy, and I think it's very much the same ethos of representing the independent miniatures scene run by, I guess it's the same as independent film or independent music as opposed to the big studio stuff, and sometimes that material can be just as interesting, but doesn't always have the same audience. So yeah, it's
And it's for me, it was always interesting to bring especially these smaller games because well, it's basically if you produce a video for one of these games, then you are pretty much guaranteed to show up at the top of every search for this game.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's a kind of logical decision for myself
yeah.
when I do what I also sometimes do, where 40K video or something from Games Workshop or Fantasy Flight, then I always get buried by all the bigger players and bigger channels, and
yeah.
English and German, and that was for me very attractive to just go after the smaller games. And I also have tons of tabletop miniatures, especially from all these smaller games,
Yeah.
which I, prior to starting the channel, almost never brought to the table. And that was also a good way for me to force myself to play more and to paint up some of the miniatures I already had lying around and just work through my collection. And that worked out okay-ish, because I also expanded my collection like 2-3 times since I started.
Yeah.
So I'm not really done in catching up, but
I mean,
it's great fun.
I don't really know what you mean, because of course I don't have any unpainted models. Everything is painted, and I paint them as I buy them. Everyone does that, don't they? It's just you who
I seem to be the only one.
yeah, I think so.
My special thing.
Yeah. But no, I think it's admirable, and I think it's interesting as well. I don't know what your feelings are about how whether there's a difference in feeling between some of the smaller games and the games by big companies where multiple different people have worked on the game, as opposed to just a very small team or even a single designer. What do you think about that? Do you discern any differences?
Yeah. What you said is it feels much closer to the people who are making the games. I know this from I've worked also academically worked on computer games for quite some time, and one of my problems always was getting in contact with the actual creators of the games. And with the computer game industry, even with the smaller creators, it's sometimes difficult because they have much more visibility and much less time, and are much more focused on doing their own stuff. And I have the feeling when I create a video for a smaller tabletop war game, then I'm almost always immediately in contact with the people who are behind the game, like the people who thought about it, the people who had the initial idea, who designed the game, who wrote the rules, who created the miniatures. And it's a very immediate feeling, and it's great for me because I'm very interested in the people who are making the games. And it's great to have this contact like with you. It's like I wrote you once about my channel and about doing some videos, and we are, and it's very natural.
Well, we met at Essen, really, I think, very shortly after we first spoke, and got on very nicely. And it's just I think one of the exciting things for me about the wargaming and games industry in general is that kind of social contact, and how how friendly people are, how much we're effectively all like-minded, which isn't necessarily true in other industries. I find that compelling, and I find that sense of community a big part of it. And of course, it's true of the people that make bigger games as well. But of course, they have to. When you work for a bigger company, you have to always have the professional face on, and perhaps you can't claim too much authorship because you're part of a team, and that social aspect is within the company and doesn't really sort of come out beyond it very often.
Yeah, especially find the aspect of the singular vision hinter. I'm starting to speak German, behind the game.
Yeah.
Like you have one person or just one or two who all had one idea and are pursuing it and are doing everything to get behind this idea. And it's fascinating. And
and I feel like there's probably and of course for every rule there are as many hundreds of exceptions, and so this isn't a universal law, but something I feel you get a sense of quite often is that in the smaller companies, the level of professionalism and polish is much lower, but the passion and the enthusiasm is much higher. Whereas in a game that's produced by a larger company, it's very often much more professionally produced, and the quality of rules might be better. Not always, but often they are, and often they've got more resources to play test and to really. I think Fantasy Flight would be a great example of a company that really is a well-oiled machine when it comes to getting a team of people to make a really, really well-designed game. But often with the bigger companies, and I've just mentioned Fantasy Flight, I'm not necessarily talking about them in this next clause, but some of the passion is lost, and some of that enthusiasm and excitement about what you're doing is lost when you're just going to work,
That's with everything. I think it's when does it become work, and when is it mainly passion? And I also mean that I know a lot of people who are working on tabletop war games who aren't doing this as their main source of income. And that's also one aspect where I can really identify myself with these people, because I think every wargamer has had this idea or this thought, what if I made my own game? What if I did some game design myself, or created some miniatures or something like that? And I really admire people who just do it, because I know it's incredibly hard, and
it's definitely harder than it looks, I think.
And it's a big risk to invest so much of your time into something where you don't know if it will ever be successful, or if you don't know if it ever will interest enough people to make it worth your time investment. And that's basically, it's the same with my YouTube channel. I really don't know if I will ever get at the point where I get a reasonable return to my investment, both
Yeah.
money wise and time wise.
Mm.
And I always have my little voice in the back of my head, which sometimes sounds like the voice of my wife, who says, "Toby, how much time did you spend this week on creating videos, and how much money did you make with these videos?" And I don't care really. I just love doing it, and I really admire people who just enjoy what they are doing
Yeah.
and choose it over something where they perhaps could have an easier life or a more.
Well, and also it's if you can if you have a hobby and something that you're passionate about, then that's already very lucky, because I think some people don't really know how to spend their spare time other than just watching TV or going to the pub or various other things. I mean, I do those things as well, but I feel very lucky that there's something that I'm really sort of passionate and excited about, and the opportunity to pursue those things can sometimes coincide with either what you do for a living or just what you do as supplemental income. And a lot of people commission painters, these kinds of jobs where people just find a way to supplement their income from their hobby as well. It's sort of like living the dream a little bit.
Yeah.
So the topic of today's video, and we kind of we sort of almost touched on it before, actually. We're talking about what it's like to game in a non-native language. So, for example, your YouTube channel is German language typically, but you play a lot of games that aren't published in German, and so you have to use, typically, I guess, it's the English version of the rules. And I know from having spent a number of years visiting or exhibiting now at the Essen show, which I think is the biggest gaming convention in the world. I think it's twice the size of Gen Con. It's how many attendees? Something like 200,000 attendees over the course of 4 days. It's absolutely incredible. But my having spoken to a lot of German gamers, opinion seems to be very divided about a bunch of them. And of course, you're all blessed because you have good schools that take learning a foreign language seriously, which I'm afraid our schools don't. Everybody speaks our language already, so we're terribly lazy about it, and our school system just doesn't. You have to do a foreign language, but the standard that you are expected to learn it at is really poor. But opinion of the German people that I've spoken to about wargaming seems to be divided between people that say, well, it would be nice to have it in your own language, but even if it was, I would still play it in English, because then I know that I'm getting the rules exactly right, and translations, often there are some problems. And the other half of people who say, maybe if you get a German translation, I really like the game, but I'm going to hold off until you get a German translation. I don't like to play games in another language.
No. Yeah, it's a very complicated topic. Especially, I can only talk for well, I can't really talk for us Germans. I can only talk about the people I know.
Yeah.
But it's something I often think about, because I often encounter the problem that I find a new game, and it's with most independent games, it's only in English, because I think considering translations into other languages is something way down the pipeline for most designers. And often the question arises, is it worth it or is it not?
Yeah.
And I tend to just go with it. I always play my games when they are mainly available in English, and I play them in English. I am used to playing games with English rules the same way I'm used to playing PC games in English, where I chose to do so a long time ago because the German dubs we have sometimes are very often very terrible. With movies and series, it's kind of different. Our dubbing industry is kind of competent, which is a good and a bad thing at the same time.
Yeah.
Because it leads to more people refusing to watch movies and series in their original language with subtitles. But on the other side, it also makes them available to more people who would have problems with reading while watching.
Yeah.
And I'm very used to it. I spoke English during my university time, and it's something very natural and normal for me just to read English. My spoken English is okay, but I'm often at a loss of words because my head tends to work slower than my mouth when I speak English, where it works faster than my mouth when I speak German. So that was hard to say.
But I bet if you spent a month here, you'd find in a few weeks, then everything you knew would come much more immediately. I think it's so. Years ago, I had a Dutch girlfriend who her English was fluent. People thought she was English, but and she'd go back to Holland and she couldn't remember her Dutch words. And it would really annoy her. And then after a few weeks in Holland, she'd be fine speaking a lot of Dutch, and then coming back to the UK, then the same thing in English. And so I think it's part of it is familiarity. But that's different from what the implication of what you've said is that's different depending on whether it's written and spoken, and your written comprehension is much better all of the time.
Yeah, I during my university time, I read academic articles in English, and I watched movies in English, and I read books in English. That's no problem at all. I have no comprehension difficulties, but it's still strange for me to form the words with my mouth, because in German I'm a very fast talker, and that it's, I think, a problem for me when I speak English. Some time ago, when I visited Ireland with a friend, we realized that when we don't try to hide our German accent, then it's easier to speak English. So when I speak like this, then it is easier for me to speak to you, because I don't have to think about all the time how I would like to say things so that they don't sound German.
But using the different sounds. Listen, we English speakers are always terrible with languages. So whenever anyone says to me, "Oh, but my English is so terrible," I'm like, "Your English is better than my anything." So I really have no right to reply.
I tend to be very self-conscious about it. But it's to go back to the topic. It's very different with different people in Germany, especially regarding tabletop rules, and because we have many people who, like, especially in the wargaming scene, where we have a pretty high average age of the people, and I think it's very much a generational thing. So if you are a little bit older, then it may very well be that you don't have this super good comprehension of especially the English language, because the English education in schools was not that great a few years past, and really always depended on your teacher. And we also are only right now experiencing more and more content and movies and things in English, or games in English, where more and more people are actually accepting it and trying it out and trying to understand, and learning more in school, learning more at work, because in most modern companies you have to speak English because you will have international colleagues.
Yeah.
And so more and more people are forced to speak English, and so it becomes easier. But for older generations, and I don't mean like World War II generation, but like people who are 50 or 60,
Yeah.
it may be very difficult. Or if they come from former East Germany, or right now East Germany, former German
Former Soviet.
Democratic Republic,
Yeah.
they of course did not have that much exposure to English culture and language
Yeah.
like the West did. And so we have that problem, and then there's some cultural things also. Like we have a very lively debate in Germany about the usage of English language and terms in
Loan
everyday
words.
German
Yeah.
language.
Yeah,
And
I know the French have the same thing, that they call it le weekend, and this is scandalous to some people and perfectly normal to other people. But there's and in Britain, of course, sorry, Sean, but in Britain we have a certain amount of Americanization in our language as well, which some people find very annoying, and dislike and fight against and what have you. And there are also some interesting things. So I think a lot of idiomatic language that comes from America the Americans have been great over the last 150 years at coming up with really punchy phrases and nice ways of describing things. And a lot of it comes from games and sort of gambling games, and, when the chips are down and these kinds of expressions, which nobody in Britain thinks of as Americanizations at all. But there are other things, and particularly with the internet, a lot of British people can't spell anymore, and they sort of use the American spelling for words and don't even know that they're doing it. And so it's the same thing. We have the same kind of debates here, and of course it's even more complicated when it's ambiguous, and sometimes you don't even know whether it's your own native brand of your language. But le weekend is pretty obvious.
That was a question actually I had in my mind, Toby, was about English is a pretty tricky grammatical and grammar language compared to some of the other Romance languages. I'm remembering back from high school, I took Latin. I didn't take French or Spanish or any of those, unfortunately. But I did remember that learning English can be a lot harder than some of the other ones. So when you combine that into, does that add a lot of ambiguity when trying to figure out the intention of some rule sets, or what the author wanted you to do in this rules interaction?
I think it's first it's actually learning English for many people is not that difficult, because English you can express in very simple terms a lot of things in English. My old professor at the university always said that English is easy to learn but hard to master, and language like German is very hard to learn but easy to master.
Yeah. Because you
English,
basically have a much more complicated grammar than we do, but 1/3 of our language is exceptions to the grammar rules that we have.
I think that's what I'm thinking about. Yeah, is that it's just all exceptions.
Yeah,
especially the vocabulary of English is incredibly deep. So you can when you hear someone talk who really has grown up with the language, he talks in a completely different way than someone who even is very fluent with the language but did not learn it from the ground up.
Yeah.
So I always noticed this when I read academic articles, because you can always see within a few paragraphs if the people who wrote the article is a native English speaker or not.
Yeah.
Because the language, it's much more colorful in English and much more diverse with the use of vocabulary, and the non-native speaker always repeats the same words basically.
Yeah.
So,
We have a ridiculous variety of words that mean almost but not quite the same thing.
and that's great because it gives the language color and diversity and makes it just such a great.
It's expressive, yeah. But I also think that English is a very it typically it is actually, in terms of not in terms of grammatical rules, but in terms of meaning, it's a very precise language. There aren't very many sentences that you can make in English which are ambiguous and which could mean a number of different things, or at least it's very easy to make them very precise,
which makes it great for writing rules.
Yeah, and this was my next question. I think I'm sure you might. Well, I hope you have an example, because I'd be fascinated to hear about it, of a game that you have played in both the original English and a German translation, and what's the difference in experience between those two?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because it also addresses the second question Sean was asking about the difficulties in comprehension, because I think when you learn playing games with rule books, which I also noticed in my regular job as technical writer, when I write manuals, you use your own language, you use your own rules, which are very, very precise and which do not really adhere to conventional writing rules and style rules. You have to adhere to very specific things. And one thing is that when you start reading rules from different games and different war games, especially well-written rules, of course, then you learn this specific language of game rules, because there are some things which always come up, and especially
there's a
in
kind of grammar to them,
like what is a charge, what is the difference between
line of sight,
an advance or a move or a push or a pull. All these things, these are constants which always repeat themselves. They are handled a little bit differently from game to game, but you tend to watch for these things. And the more rules you read, the more you comprehend the nuances. I don't know, nuances. Yeah. Is the English word. And
it's a French word.
Yeah. And die Feinheiten, we say in German. And you tend to learn not especially the English language, because I think if you only read rule books, then you won't really learn the English language, but you will learn rules English.
Yeah, and, you'll learn a very strange kind of English, I guess.
Yeah, yes. A very militaristic kind of English.
And it's almost, it really is almost its own language, like this technical manual of how to play the game, versus also making it relatable so that everyone can read it. So you've got like the specificness of technical writing, but also the down-to-earthness to be able to be understandable to such a wide swath of people.
Yeah.
And it's one thing I really appreciate with a lot of English rule sets, that they are written in a very condensed and very technical way, because especially as someone who does technical documentation, I see where the merit is in this approach, where you don't write these essays and novels of rules where you have these giant blocks of text, where you have like half fluff and flavor text, and the other half is actually rules text, but they are not under one another, but they are kind of interwoven into another. A little bit like Games Workshop tends to write some of their rules even today, and a lot of other companies as well, because they think they have to tell a story when they write rules. And And in many cases, you have with these very condensed rules, you have everything in a very tight space and everything you need to know about the game to actually comprehend it. And yeah, there are um, so many things that are taken from technical writing, which apply perfectly to rules writing, like writing in bullet points and writing in very very strict rules and leaving out everything which is like just blows up the text.
Mm.
And when I read in English, which to come back to the original question, sorry, I seem to like talking in English as well as in German. Um, um, then it's very normal for me because I read the rules and I have learned the conventions of reading English rules, and I have no problem with something which might sound a little bit strange when you read it in another context. Like when you read rules and it's all very technical and not very nicely written and not very very flowery, and that's okay. I recognize the terms I have to look for, and I recognize that I have to be very strict with my interpretation of the rules, and
Yeah.
that's okay. But when I read the same thing in German, then it's very difficult because I grew up with speaking German. I know how to speak German. I know how to write German. I write all the time, and not only technical, but also like a nicer way. And when I then read these German rules texts, then it's much more strange. Like, and this is where I would come back to your question regarding an example. One of the first games I both read the German and the English rules was War Machine or War Machine by Privateer Press, and I actually learned the rules in English. I watched some videos. I had some people explain them to me. The actual rules I read much later because I think that's often the way with games.
Yeah.
That you
Yeah.
get explained to you. And I later on a tournament, I encountered someone who read all the rules in German, and I had read all the rules in English. And he also had all the character cards, all the stat cards in German. And then I noticed how strange some of the things I thought were very normal in my War Machine rules are in German. Like you have very strict conventions, like that specific models are called warrior models because some rules only apply to a warrior model.
Yeah.
And then you had the German translation, which was super strange. Which was like normally in German, warrior is Krieger, which sounds much. Yeah, it's a very German word, Krieger, and a very hard word. But they didn't use the word Krieger; they used Recke, which is a very, I don't even know, it's a very old word for similar thing, but not actually only for a warrior, but like I don't even know what it actually means. It's just they used this word because they wanted to create this effect that you can't have a misinterpretation, because a warrior, a Krieger, could be basically anything on the field. Like
I see.
your warcaster is also a warrior because it's
so because it's specific, it's terminology. They're invoking a term. They don't want to use the most obvious word for it because then they think that perhaps people will just they won't understand that it's capitalized and that it's a term that you should be recognizing. I understand, and I think this is difficult from a rules writer point of view. And Sean's been instrumental in proofreading the original rulebook and what we're working on now, Elia Chronicles, so I'm trying to take a different approach. I don't want to get too much into that, but there's what you were talking about earlier about the precise writing. Well, sometimes that writing is quite hard to read, and if you're really willing to study, then it's completely unambiguous, and you've done a fantastic job. And I think I have actually with the original rulebook. It's taken me years of scratching my head and being nervous about it before I really come to the conclusion. No, actually, it's a good rulebook. I'm quite proud of it. But with Elia Chronicles, I don't want because it's not a competitive game. I don't want to write a lot of rules and make it very precise. I want it to be much more conversational and much more relaxed and much, Bier and Bretzel style of wargaming, where we all just rock up and move some stuff around, and it doesn't really matter. The fine detail doesn't really matter as much. But at the same time, you don't want ambiguity, because people find that frustrating and people want to know the answer to the question. So now it's a question, whereas previously I was trying to make sure that there was no ambiguity, but also there was no opportunity for exploitation. And this is another thing that I wanted to talk about as with the translation, whether you find that it opens this opportunity up. We all know that guy who wants to win too much. Maybe he doesn't have a girlfriend. Maybe he doesn't have anything happy in his life. The only thing he wants is to beat you, and preferably to make you cry. And if you write a bad rule book, then it's a gift to that person who wants to ruin everybody else's day. He knows what you meant in the rules. He knows fully that you didn't mean that this ridiculous thing would happen. But there's one slight interpretation of a sentence that isn't worded completely in cast iron, that opens up the opportunity for him to then make this case, and hopefully get a withering look from the tournament organizer, and maybe even a slap. But we've all been there, right? In a cooperative game, you don't have that problem. And so we can write a rule set which is much more colloquial, much more friendly, much easier to read, but at the same time has that maybe not quite the same cast iron precision, but still has the same level of unambiguity. And so when a sentence is translated, and it's an important concept, do you find that there's a very good translation, and sometimes there's just not such a good translation? And maybe the difference is whether the translator really fully understood the implication of what they were translating.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the position the translator is in, because I've seen some there are lots of fan-made translations around in German, because there are always fans who just want to make the game more available to other people, and then they begin with translating. They are not professional translators, and in many cases these translations are great because the people actually play the game and know how to interpret the rules and how to communicate them in a way that they are understood as they are meant. But there are also these cases where I had this in one instance, where I think it was a French company. They let people make the translations who are fans, basically, but they gave different parts of the rules and the different factions for the game to different people for translation.
Yeah, I can already see what's going to happen wrong here.
Yeah, and exactly that happened. That different terms were translated in a different way. And there were no you can always solve this from as I said, I'm a technical writer, so the first thing you do is you do a glossary, so that everyone is on the same page what terms to use in which case. Or when you do marketing for a company, then you do the same. You have to communicate what is called what, because otherwise you have like the developers of a software are calling a feature one way, then there is the sales name they are giving, then there's the marketing name which sounds a little bit catchier, and nobody in the end knows what you're talking about. And the same happens with rules translations, and in this case this was very bad, because if you knew the original rules, then you could comprehend that these two different terms on two different cards meant the same thing.
Yeah.
But you had to know the rules for that. So if you learn the game and you begin looking for specific terms, and then you look in the rule book and they are nowhere, because the person who translated the rule book was another person from the persons who translated the cards, and it's very frustrating in this instance. And there's also the problem that we often have the case that the German translation is very much behind the English original.
There are different versions or updates or rules changes or something like that. Yeah, so unfortunately that's the situation now with the Drowned Earth. We had a French translation, and the company that was doing the translation, we just haven't been able to keep up with the various iterations. Which is a little bit problematic and a bit of a shame. Luckily, there haven't been very many changes. But I think something that we're going to do, which I guess would make it easier for a translator as well. So Sean is brilliant at picking up my inability to thoroughly and consistently capitalize game terms. So I want every term which is terminology to be capitalized, and I try to do it. And Sean's like a ferret, managing to find every single one that I've failed to do. I think in Elia Chronicles we're not just going to capitalize them. I think we're going to make them bold. So if it's anything that you can look up, anything that you can look up in the rule book, anything that has its own section will be bold in the text.
Now I have to say a lot of that comes from my own desire. My own desire for rules to be able to be understood and digested as simply for the intention. Games Workshop, oh my lord. When I got into Necromunda, I think I about threw the rule book, which was on my PD on a tablet, through the window 3 times, just trying to find a simple answer to what is cover. How is something protected?
Was it capitalized though, Sean? That's
no,
what we need to...
No, and there wasn't even any like table of contents or index or any way to give you any indication. It was like, all right, I have to read through these 3 different things to find a poem or a sonnet that tells me how not to get shot. But a lot of it also comes, Toby, from technical writing. Both my theater background, which has I have to write down as a stage manager very concise instructions, but then my dad for most of my life was a programmer, and then he had his own business, and he was making software for machines to monitor machine health and vibrations and things like that. So I made some money here and there doing a technical manual for their software to explain it, and so I'd have to go with him, like, how does this work? All right, and now I got to write down to be able to teach somebody how to use it. So that's where my eyes are coming when I was helping to edit the rule book. Was if this is a term blunder, then we make it a term rather than a word type of thing.
Yeah, well, it's gold dust to me, and it's definitely it's something that I really believe in, because Toby, not only are there bad translations from English into German, there are also bad translations from English into English, where the people just didn't do a very good job of writing the rules or communicating the rules in the first place. And I'm now. Years ago, I ran a pub for a few years, and it made me really understanding of bar staff that were really busy and struggling to cope with the demand for their work. But it made me extremely unsympathetic to bar staff who were just rubbish when it wasn't busy. And I'm the same now with rule books, and my girlfriend will tell you that I'm a terror when we break open a board game and I'm like, who wrote this rubbish? I mean, it's like nothing's in the right order. It's not clear, and well, this should have an index, and if it doesn't, it should be, throw it at the wall. Yeah.
You get frustrated much more quickly. I have the feeling nowadays. I just recently I played a solo war game, which is called Hardwired.
Yeah.
It's like a an open miniatures agnostic cyberpunk game, and it has this really cool concept and some very nice ideas around the core mechanics, which are really easy to implement. And I played the game, and I almost went mad because it was like half of the rules were just never explained. They would just say, okay, so you have this hacker, he's this cool super hacker dude, and he can hack drones of the enemy. And when he hacks the drone, then you have to roll this and that, and then you just take control of the drone. And never in this book was it explained what it means that I take control of this drone. It just never. And it's okay when you are someone who is very lenient and very creative with rules and always tends to make up his own rules during the game, but that's actually something I would rather prefer during like role-playing sessions. Because in role-playing sessions, the rules are just
guidelines.
Yeah.
You've paid for a rule book, and you paid to play a game and to be taught how to play that game. You shouldn't have to make up the rules to make it work. And I think this is the difference between a role-play game and a war game. A role-play game will work without you making up your own rules. There's a set way of doing things, and the rulebook explains how you do those things. And if you want to add to it or subtract from it, then that's completely up to you. But if you have to make up rules in order for the game to function, then that's really bad. It's bad in a war game. It's especially bad in a board game, because you know that that is 100% not the way it's supposed to be, and it's just somebody did not do their job somewhere down the line.
And I realize it's very hard to do this, to make rules which are like impeccable, which have no.
It is hard.
Yeah, but there's a difference between like some rules which need to be played to find these last few holes in them, because playtesting is important because of a reason. You can't always see all the perspectives.
Whenever you see that kind of situation where somebody has done exactly that, you can tell that there's something that you see. The designer knows how this works, but the rulebook doesn't tell you, because they haven't been able to put themselves in the mindset of somebody who's never seen this before. You say they did no blind play testing. Like, it's just really obvious. They never put this in the hands of somebody who didn't already know how to play and watch them try to work it out, because that's a very humbling and illuminating experience. Of if you can hand something to somebody and not tell them anything about it, give them a bunch of components. We've been doing it recently with Elia Chronicles. Obviously, we've all been stuck indoors, and so we've been sending it out to people. And it's the document is going to have to sink or swim by itself. The rules and the components. Can you make this game work? And that will eliminate 80% of the problems, provided you care enough to listen to what people say, and provided you've got people who are genuinely going to tell you, what the issues are, if there are any.
Yeah. And I also wanted to come back a little bit to the translation topic. There's also one thing I realized just recently, is that I have lots of people I show games to. Like that's what I mentioned at the beginning. I find a game, I make a battle report for it, and one of the first things that will always come up is there a German version for the rules?
Mm.
And most of the time I have to say no. And that's for some people that's okay. For some people that's a like yeah, they can't play the
A
game
deal
because
breaker.
yeah. And but so there's this point of view that you could in theory you could always say translated rules are always a plus for a game.
Yeah.
Because you have a broader audience. But I recently realized that could be only half the truth, because we had this one case with one of the more recent Games Workshop games, Adeptus Titanicus, and they actually, like they do with most of their games, released with the English version also a German version of their rulebook, and the translation was absolutely terrible, like really terrible. They had passages which were not fully translated. They had very strange translations, which just so you had the feeling that the people who did the translation never really got in contact with the game. They just did translation
They
work.
translated the words, but they didn't understand what they were.
My
Like
guess is
Korean pop. Sometimes you hear them singing in English, and you're like, they have no idea what they're saying. It's really obvious.
And my guess is that Games Workshop just wanted to try out a cheaper way of doing translations or something.
See whether
I
it
don't know.
works. Maybe they ran it through Google Translate and just.
Just use, love it. Just use DeepL. DeepL is like the super magic power for all translators.
But do you find in a game that's big enough where there's a substantial community and there's a German translation, is the community in Germany divided between the people who play in English and the people who play in German, or is it relatively cohesive despite that?
Well, it is divided by which rules the people are using, but usually the people still play together as always.
Yeah,
it's just you have some minor problems with like the tournament scenes for some games
when
where
you get
have
competitive.
where you have to be very precise on what is used, what rules are used, especially when the German translation is a little bit behind the English ones, and especially when you have games like Fantasy Flight and Cool Mini or Not are especially great with being way behind the translations.
I see.
They have,
yeah.
I think it's Asmodee in here in
That's Fantasy
Germany.
Flight. Yeah,
they are doing the sales here in Germany, and they're also doing the translations, and they are way behind with the translations. So if you want to use newer releases in your tournaments, you have to use the English rules, and that can be a problem for people who just can't speak English, and especially when you want to be open about effects, about abilities, and in normal games you can just show your opponent your cards and they can have a look at it, and it's all fine. But in these cases it tends to be a little bit difficult, but most of the time it's very uncomplicated, because most tournaments are very easygoing with everything, because it's basically just people playing together, and they are not playing for money or big trophies. They're just playing for fun, so it's all okay.
I guess if people who both have the same native tongue and are playing the game in their native tongue find ways to have arguments and disagreements about the way about the interpretation of the rules, then it can only be more complicated to then introduce a translation. But no.
And the one thing I wanted to mention was with the Adeptus Titanicus thing, that my feeling is that this botched translation really hurt the game in Germany.
Really, yeah,
really.
yeah.
And right now they don't translate any of the newer releases, and they just release a new starter set, and the game is doing pretty well right now. But it really had to recover from this problem at the beginning with the translation, because many people were just put off by the lack of quality in translation. And this is one thing I realized, is that if you want to do a translation into German, then you really have to do it right, because people also tend to be very entitled. They feel very entitled to the stuff they get. So people demand in many cases the translations for their games, which I completely understand, because they want to play the games. They are entitled because they are passionate about the games. But it doesn't make it easier for the people making the games, especially if they are not big companies. And I also talked with some publishers here in Germany, who also say that when they are doing the translation, then it may very well be because they have to wait for the original to be sent over, then they have to translate, then they have to do the formatting and the printing, or they have to distribute them. And in many cases, people don't like to wait, and then they just move on to other games, or they decide to let's try the English version, and then they won't get or buy or something.
Well, another challenge for a small company is just that your print runs are small, which means that your print in your native language, the print runs are small. Print runs in a translation would have to be smaller, and that makes the books much more expensive to produce. And so, like, maybe more than double the cost. If you're doing print runs of 1,000, and then you have to do a print run of, like, let's say 300, then it's very hard at 300 copies to find a printer that can do that at an affordable level. And at the same time, you've got the worry about, is the translation good? I don't speak this language. How am I ever going to know? All I can do really is just, cross my fingers and hire somebody who seems like a professional. And I'm sure, it's self-evident that you need somebody who's not just highly competent linguistically, but who also understands what it is that they're translating and is a gamer themselves. But even that isn't enough. They still have to take the time to really become acquainted with the game that they're translating, and that is just from the point of view of a translator, that's so much bigger a job than just translating newspaper articles or something like that. And so people wonder why you don't get it done, and they sort of, you're right, there is a sense of entitlement there sometimes, of like, well, it's easy, just get on with it. And it's like, well, it's not easy, it's very expensive, and it probably won't make you any money. So it's a difficult thing to do. And as an independent producer, so what we did with the French translation was I translated it and released it as a PDF, but I never printed it. And so I know that a number of people in France were upset that they couldn't read the fluff, because that's in the print version of the rules only. So we obviously didn't charge for the French PDF, and I was like, yeah, hopefully one day we'll be able to do that, but for now it's just completely impossible.
What I do actually with people who are asking for translations is I just refer them to DeepL. I don't know if you know DeepL, the translation tool. It's like black magic software. I can send you the link later. It's like just DeepL, like DEEPL.com, and it's artificial intelligence and machine learning supported translation software, and it has like the most crazy precise translation I have ever encountered with anything. Like in our company, we our documentation section was normally myself and one friend or one colleague who did all the English translations, who studied English and did all the technical translation. And DeepL does so much work for us right now that he's now working in a completely different section of the company.
Yeah.
Because we just don't need him anymore. And it doesn't mean that it just replaces all translation work which is needed, especially with game rules. But what I tend to do when I did some fluff or tabletop lore videos a while ago, where I just took fluff text from games like The Drowned Earth. I did one for The Drowned Earth, and some for Wild West Exodus, and some for Malifaux. And I just took the lore texts and just put them in DeepL, and then I just read down what the translator gave out.
Yeah.
And like I had to change, like when I had one page of text, I have to change like 2 or 3 things. And it's absolutely crazy. And
yeah, it's really interesting. And I guess that's the key, isn't it? It isn't just about the initial translation. It's about the proofreading and making sure that, even if the translator isn't fully acquainted with the game, that some native speakers who are very acquainted and also very passionate about the game read it and make sure that it's okay before you release it. But yeah, interesting stuff.
Do you guys think that symbology really helps to make it more universal? I was just thinking about, I also play Warcry, and like all of their faction packs, not only are the cards themselves, there's no real language, it's all symbols and numbers that you know what they mean in terms of gameplay. And all of the faction decks come out with a card in like almost every language. There's a card in the pack for German, Chinese, Japanese, French, to help wherever it can be sold anywhere. So does that kind of like using more symbols really help to make it a more universal game?
Well, I think you still have to do the basic rules text translation. I think it really helps when you have a very card-based game, or you have stat cards, and you have you don't have to print a stat card for every language, which they don't have to, which is really handy, I think. But on the other side, I see the merit in doing symbols for rules, but I also am very skeptical about the whole concept if it's taken too far. Like I just recently got my Kickstarter pledge for the Monolith Batman Arkham City Chronicles game, which is like the same rule set like the Conan board game.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think they tried something like that. They have these beautiful character boards where you have all the abilities and everything is symbol coded. So there's no text on any of the cards, and it looks really nice, but it's like a nightmare to use in game because you have to reference everything. You have like 10 pages of reference guides where you have to search for all the symbols, and then you have to also have really talented graphic designers who manage to make symbols which are really clearly readable and perhaps also speak a little bit for themselves without you having to reference the rules all the time. And this is something that Warcry really does not manage with
That's true. Yeah.
with the unit categories they have. Like I think it's the undead warband, where like every symbol is just a skull with a minor detail, which is different. It's just terrible. And it's okay because you have so little rules and so little special abilities in Warcry. So you really quickly learn who does what, and you don't need the cards anymore.
Yeah.
But
I
with a
think
game which is
it's
more complex, and every game is more complex than Warcry. Then it really becomes very, very hard to manage.
So in the board and card game sphere, language independent games are quite a big thing, and obviously for a lot of German game producers, and we're talking about board games rather than miniatures games here. Producing something that's language independent is economically very sensible, because you just have to print a couple of different rules sheets and include them in the box, and then you can send the same box out to multiple different territories. And I think it speaks volumes that those language independent games are always quite simple. They just don't work otherwise. And I find I'm a huge fan of. I don't know if either of you have played it or played the original. So there's a game called Seven Wonders, which is quite a well-known game. And they released a 2-player version of it called Seven Wonders Duel, which I think is actually better, really rare in the case of like taking a really beloved multiplayer game and making a 2-player version. Normally it's a slight cash grab, and this one it's better. There are so many bloody symbols in the thing, though. You really have to sit there with those reference cards in order to do it, and it just about works with that one. Any more than that, and it would be too much, I think. And it also depends on how often you are expecting your players to play your game in order to stay acquainted with it. So if it's a weekly thing, Magic the Gathering, for example, it might be alienating to new players, but they could certainly get away with doing a lot of that kind of thing for their regular players. And there are an awful lot of keywords which are not explained on the cards, for example, because it's just understood that you'll know these 150 keywords because you do play Friday Night Magic every Friday night. On a lot of miniatures games, though, we don't really expect people to be playing on a weekly basis. I'd love to think they were, but typically a lot of miniatures gamers don't have one main game. They play, maybe they have one main game and lots of minor games, and they play their main game half the time or less than half their time. But you really need to remember, I think, as a designer, that people aren't going to play your game as much as you think they will, or as much as you'd like to think that they will. And something that you can keep accessible in terms of symbology and in terms of how much weight there is to understand the game and to keep on engaging with it and not having to constantly reference. And I think this is another translation issue. It's probably much easier if the translation is good, but you've designed a game which people don't constantly have to refer back to the rule book. Then if one person doesn't have to refer back to the German rulebook and another person doesn't have to refer back to the English rulebook, they're going to have way less conflict than two people in those respective languages who do have to reference those rulebooks and argue over what the text means.
And there's also the thing that different languages work in different ways. It's like I always see this when I have a English and a German text next to each other, where the German text usually is much longer than the English text, and so you can't even just take the text of both of the English version and just transfer it one-to-one to the German version, but you have to keep in mind that you have to express things in a different way so that they are understandable and still communicate what was meant in the original English. And it's so difficult, it's so complicated to wrap your head around in some cases.
Well, I feel like we've gone all around the houses and came to the conclusion we were always going to come to, which is that there are merits and advantages and disadvantages to both. And so the more tools you have at your disposal, the better, I guess. But I think that's been a really interesting insight from somebody who only speaks his own language and certainly has never tried to learn a game in another language. I've tried to read graphic novels in French, and my French is like terrible schoolboy. I think if I was dropped in the middle of France in a parachute, I could find my way out by asking directions and ordering food, but I wouldn't be having any conversations with anyone. But yeah, interesting topic, and I think we're sort of getting to the end of our allotted time, and I realised that we have not. We talked about the Paint All the Minis convention and the fantastic work that Toby did for our tabletop simulator module, and we were going to have a look at it. So Toby, take it away. Let's have a look.
Okay, so let's see. Okay. Just 1 second.
That's all right. You've got to do a thing, and then I have to do a thing. We're if people are wondering why the view has changed quite often and hasn't always been all that seamless, it's we are using new software. In the top right, you can see we're trying StreamYard out, and it's been great, but it does require me to manually click between different screens and different configurations, and there's a lot of symbology here actually, and I don't necessarily always know what the symbols mean, but in general I think it's been pretty successful. I'm quite happy with it.
Yeah, I've seen 1 or 2 comments. The chat has liked it.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think we might stick with it. So Toby, we are now sharing your screen. You're getting into Tabletop Simulator.
Yeah, sorry, I had to restart the program.
No problem at all.
So, okay, so you should see the Tabletop Simulator module right now. That's the big setup. I also did one table for the convention, where it's just the demo setup with a 2 feet by 2 feet, I think it's table.
Yes, that's right.
So if you have been to Essen or one of the conventions where James was attending, then you might be familiar with the demo table. But what I built here was the full game table with some pieces of terrain, which I just grabbed from other modules on the Tabletop Simulator, and we have 2 or 3 warbands right now, which I made from the incredibly nice artwork which James provided for me for the miniatures. So what you see here, they are basically 2D standees miniatures. And we have right now the firm, and we have the artifactors. We also have some more miniatures for both factions, so all releases should be included except the mounted ones, I think.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and so you can grab your miniatures, and the cards are also included, of course. Then we have also the Wayfarer faction, so you can just mix them into your warbands of the firm or the artifactors, or you can just play them as their own faction. And then I have also included the special dice for. Let's see, I have to rotate to 1. No, wrong dice.
Yeah, that's the one, the orange one. Yeah,
with the special feed symbol.
Awesome.
So everything you need to play is here, and like I said, the whole thing is like a physics sandbox. So when you're playing, you just have to imagine you're playing on a real table. So you take your miniatures, you place them on the board, you move them around. You can also measure distances, and if you have never used the Tabletop Simulator, then just use the tutorial which is included, which explains a lot of the basic concepts. And otherwise, you can just, I think, ask in the Discord or anywhere else. I think there will be people helping you. And yeah, that's it. It's a very basic module. It has no fancy scripts or anything like that. but I think it's very well playable right now. So if you want to play a match of the Drowned Earth and you have no one to play right now, especially with the whole quarantine situation, then you can try this one out.
Yeah, it's really ideal for that. We gave a lot of demos over the weekend, and I think like any software, there's a little bit of a learning curve where you just need to work out, how do I move the camera, how do I pick things up, etc. But I think the main feedback we got was that people took to it very quickly. It's not difficult to learn at all. And it's an incredible tool to be able to, while we're all stuck in our homes, not allowed to go out too much, not allowed to game and meet friends, to be able to navigate in 3 dimensions a full Drowned Earth table. I have to say, it's something that I just didn't really, I assumed was just not really possible. It's something.
One of the other things that I think that I love about this is that I've chatted with so many of you guys, and especially the German community online, but just chatted. So like I'm talking to Jaka on the chat now. We're going to work out a game to play together. I can play a game with James finally. We've never played a game of it yet together. Yeah. So I love that. I'll be able to play
because
with
I'm going to make you play test now remotely.
Now that's true. We can do digital play testing.
Yeah. No, it's all possible, and I think so. The news is that we are going to be opening this up to everyone to play, and we'll set up a special area on our Discord channel to let people just sort of drop in, as long as somebody's got the module. In the convention, the demoers, the demo team all had the module. They were subscribed to it. One person has to have subscribed to it, then you can both play. But in our regular Discord, we'll just set up a room and a voice chat and let people play casually, formally. We could even run a tournament, but we're going to get the other 2 factions in there as soon as possible. And I think we've definitely got 3 of the 6 dino types we have in already. Obviously, I need to do some work there to create some sort of standee art for them, because they have slightly different character art to all of the others. They're much more painterly and have backgrounds and things like that. So we need to kind of cut them out nicely. But I mean, that's something that's going to be coming over the next few weeks, we hope. Really excited about it. Can't wait to let everybody have a go. And I think we'll try and run a little online tournament. Cool. Why not? Keep it casual, keep it fun, but run an event.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Excellent. Well, guys, thanks so much for this very interesting chat. I feel like we've really done more than scratch the surface, and had an interesting time, I hope. Well, I'm certainly on a daily basis dying to stop working and just sort of hang out and relax a little bit, and hopefully everybody's enjoying watching these sessions as well. Huge thanks to you, Toby, for not only for the tabletop simulator module, but just for being a great ambassador for the game and a champion of the game, and for being here and attending this little hangout.
It's always a pleasure.
Good. Sean, thanks again.
Of course.
And we will sign off here and speak to you all soon. Take care.
Can I greet some people?
Oh, yes, of course. Please do.
I noticed some people in the chat, and I have to address them.
Yep, definitely.
They showed up. Ich wollte bloß Hallo sagen an den Florian und an den Hannes und an den Jocke und an den Sebastian, von dem ich weiß, dass er auch da ist. Ich weiß nicht, unter welchem Nickname. Und falls ich noch jemanden vergessen haben sollte, tut mir das leid. Aber super cool, dass ihr vorbeigeschaut habt. Hat mich sehr gefreut. Vielen Dank. Okay.
I think I met most of the people that you shouted out at Essen last year, or the year before.
Yeah, the German, the round earth crowd.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thanks a lot, guys, and well, we'll tune in next week.